So how I'm going to run tonight is I'm going to share this presentation style with you. This very much is a indication as to kind of how I work as well and the sort of information that I bring together. So we're going to have that space going on or that presentation going on, which is all tonight about our inner decision making or our inner authority. In human design, it's called our authority. You'll often hear it talked about in terms of our intuition, our body signals, the ways in which our body speaks to us, really, is what we're looking at, and how different people have different experiences with that based on their human design. So it starts to build the framework for how we can trust our own decisions, but also how we can encourage and use the language to encourage other people to notice their body signals as well. So we're going to have that as that will maybe take us 35, 40 minutes, maybe. A little bit about the course at the end and a little bit about me at the beginning. So we're kind of topping and tailing it, but the bulk of it, I'm hoping, is things that you can take away with you to actually learn and implement over the next few weeks, because that is absolutely what I'm passionate about. You may as well use it. You may as well get use out of it. Um, so if you have questions as we go along, please do use the chat box. That's usually the easiest way for me to kind of manage what's going on within the calls. And I will leave some space at the end as well for questions, because I know that's super helpful. So this is me. I don't usually, I mean, that's a very lovely photo of me, but I usually turn up like this. Um, I'm Becky. I usually go by Becky, although my official name, Rebecca Lovatt. I work as a human design and transit specialist. Um, I've been doing this work for about 6 years, just over 6 years now. Done at least 1,000 readings. I think I've been generous there. I mean, not generous enough there. I've definitely done more than that, but yeah, I didn't want to overdo it. Trained with lots of different types of people within human design and with the source material. But the reason or the thing that I really wanted to share with you tonight is kind of the why behind this course. And I know I've written about it quite a bit as well. But this work really that I do now with coaches and with therapists and a varying number or different types of therapists, should I say, is that this is born out of personal experience. So over the last few years, I've had many meetings in both a professional sense and in a personal sense with many different types of therapists. And some experiences have been really enlightening and really enriching, and some experiences have been not great in terms of just being unable to read energy. And I don't think that's not a sly on the therapist in the slightest. We've not been taught how to do it. But what this modality teaches us to do is to start to work with people's individual energies and blueprints, and really start to understand how we can tailor seemingly small things within sessions and within planning to create much more aligned, much safer, much more trauma-informed results. So it's come largely out of this space of working with, as I say, therapists, both in a professional sense and guiding them, but also having had those experiences myself and through people close to me. It seemed like there was a missing link between what I was seeing through the charts and what was being offered. And it really has stemmed from there. And my mission really is I don't just work with human design, I do work with astrology as well. And this weaves through into to varying through varying degrees through my work. But I'm also really passionate about how the nervous system fits with this, how neuroscience backs some of this up. I'm going to be doing a master's in psychology from September and furthering my studies there in the hope that and with the intention that this work starts to get more research behind it in how it can be helpful as a template and as a framework, so that we can really start to appreciate how very different each individual person is. So that's a little bit about me. I'm always happy to answer more questions, but I do want to delve into the actual workshop tonight. So we're going to be exploring the authority. Within human design, it is called the authority. It is the decision-making process that each and every individual has, and we tap into it in different ways. So looking at insights as to looking at why insight alone doesn't create change. What is our inner authority? What are the several different types of authority? Applying authority in a session, and looking at how we can use it to rebuild self-trust as well. From both yourselves as a practitioner and also helping other people to access this as well. And this is actually the beauty in human design, right? As we go through tonight and as the course also goes through, it is all about, I'm learning about myself, but at the same time as learning about myself on another level, I'm also learning about others and the people that surround me and the people that come into my sphere on a daily basis. So it's really this double pronged effect, which is what makes it magical, I think. So just to give a little bit of kind of the neuroscience, the sciencey edge behind some of this. So the brain is constantly constructing a narrative, a story of who we are. And that story needs a framework to be able to rewrite itself very often. Frameworks are really, really helpful to be able to see where we have been and where we are going, and some sort of support system or scaffolding in the middle to help us get from one place to the next. It's very much what human design, the blueprint of human design, starts to give us. We can map our identity. We can kind of create new self stories. So the DMN, the default mode network, constructs self stories. Insight activates it, but behavior changes require embodied repeated signals from the body. So it's all well and good as thinking about having a new identity or creating a new identity, but we cannot do that unless we have got some form of structure in place so that we can start to create a story that repeats. And as we repeat that story, we start to create new ways of seeing ourselves, seeing the world, and seeing how we fit into it. Conditioning then overrides knowing. So why do we need to use these sorts of systems? Well, very often conditioning plays a huge part in why we are unable to step into the person that we know we are, or we want to be, or we want to change into. And what human design starts to talk about within the area of conditioning or deconditioning is that each person has specific points within their chart where they are more likely to be holding conditioning based on which centers are defined and undefined. And those centers where our stories live that are being fed by the outside world amplify. They shout louder than this authority that we're trying to tune into on the inside. So if our undefined centers are shouting louder, the places where we are interacting with people on a daily basis are shouting louder. When we then go to try and check in with our body to see how we feel, what our gut response is, what the little voice inside is saying, or where our passions are, or where our values are, that is not going to be a loud response. But if we know that we're working with conditioning in certain areas, we can start to unpick the stories that are shouting louder before tuning into our inner authority. So that leads us to that missing link, the body's authority. Human design maps where in the body each person's reliable decision-making intelligence actually lives. And that then becomes the intervention because it allows us to hang our hat on a specific part, a specific response in the body to keep coming back to keep checking in on. And then we start to build these new pathways, these new habits, these new routines, which our new way of being starts to hang upon. So as a neuro-aligned reflective tool, um, this is about pattern recognition. It's about reducing cognitive load. So pattern recognition is pretty much what we've just talked about. Reducing cognitive load, visual bodygraph scaffolds or organizes complex internal experiences into accessible language. So basically, when we look at the body graph, we can go, oh yeah, I know why I'm like that. I can see why I'm like that. That gives me an explanation as to why that keeps happening to me. And then I can start to not shame myself, not judge myself, but understand it because I can see it and so therefore work with it. Things that we see as just on the inside, we can suddenly see on the outside, and that makes it very understandable, very human, very practical in terms of how we can then start to take someone from one place to another. It helps us to create a new strong self-narrative. So it improves therapy outcomes because we're starting to build a solid sense of self rather than when we don't have structures, it can be quite confusing. We don't quite know where we're meant to be looking or where we're meant to be pointing or what we're trying to understand. It's that visual that it really gives us to help to reduce that judgment, reduce that shame on why we perhaps do something. It's really validating. One of the most common bits of feedback that I get is I felt seen. And when I felt seen, when I could just see myself, suddenly the problems that I thought I had weren't quite as big a problems as I thought. There's something in that, just being able to see it, which is really, really powerful and understated. It starts to also get us to understand how different people's nervous systems actually are. Some people are very sensitive to emotion, sensitive to the energies in the rooms. Some people are on their own emotional journey, and it has nothing to do with tuning into the things on the outside, the environments on the outside. Some people are hardwired to be able to manage stress or handle stress in a very different way to others. Some people, if people have undefined roots, for example, they tend to work on a bit of a panic button for a long time, or they rush things, or they don't have a sense to be able to slow down all that often. But when they start to understand that and work with that, they can consciously step into this more calm, time-aware person rather than the panic button. So different centers, depending on which ones are defined and which ones are undefined, give us an understanding as to how someone is likely to react when they're dysregulated. Undefined root, they're going to run off pressure. Undefined head and undefined third eye, people's thoughts are going to go round and round and round and round until they get into a new environment and into a new place where they can disrupt that mental loop. But if someone's got a defined head and third eye, they're going to have a very different mental experience to someone with it undefined, because we're looking at these sponges and we're looking at these places where we're feeding off energy from the outside versus having a coherent anchor on the inside. And really importantly, human design isn't about diagnosis, it's about recognizing how different people are and being able to see how very different people's energy bodies actually are. And then using it as a place to ask questions. Why is it that I react like that? Why is it that this is a story that keeps coming up. Why do I seem to have a certain gift and certain skill in this area, but I don't seem to have the capacity to do this other thing? It starts to really build that framework and narrative about who an individual is, and then how differently they work to someone else, and how them then meant to come together. So it's really multi-layered and very beautiful, a very beautiful framework in terms of how people can then come together and work together. So getting into what tonight is all about, what is the inner authority? The authority is the body's most reliable decision-making center, where genuine inner knowing lives. And for the majority of people, it is not in the mind, but the mind is the tool for analysis. So the body makes the decision then goes up to the head to get backing, to get evidence, to get information, to get understanding. So it's working with this connection between body and mind rather than just one or the other. Um, the mind can be brilliant for that analysis, for that understanding, for getting that 360-degree view of what is going on, but it will also very often act from those conditioned places, those dysregulated places, doesn't necessarily go off of what is true for the person. So we always use it within a human design sense to back up whatever the body has said or to question whatever the body has said rather than it acting on two separate kind of lines of inquiry. It's always body-based, the intuition, or time-based. So every authority is grounded in a physical center. For reflectors, they're the only type, so that 1% of the population are the only type that need time and environment to be looked at more closely when they're making a decision. But this also starts to explain why thinking things through is not always the best solution, or very often not the best solution for people to make decisions. The decisions are coming from the body. We want the mind to be backing up what information the body is signaling to us. Dysregulation often blocks access to the inner authority, so our body cannot make an aligned, clear decision if it is stressed or if there are other stories going on, which is why understanding which undefined centers we have becomes really important, because each undefined center has a specific story that is attached to it. So it might be one of pressure or rush, it might be one of self-worth, it might be one of being heard, it might be one of needing to find certainty or not being able to let go through fear and through not feeling safe. There's different stories that can be running a lot louder than the inner authority. So whenever we're working with it, it's often helpful to understand those undefined centers so that we can see, okay, what's stopping someone from accessing that inner authority. And then my favorite part in all of this from a geeky angle is that the reticular activating system, the RAS, notices what we notice. So as soon as we start to work with our inner authority, as soon as we go, okay, I'm going to see life through my emotional wave this week, or my gut response, I'm going to specifically set that filter. I'm going to look for that this week and look for evidence of it. Suddenly we see evidence of it coming in. But it's only when we set that filter that we can start to recognize that there is actually evidence to back up what my body is telling me. And this is why this, human design, astrology, all of those things work really beautifully alongside the neuroscience for this, which basically just says, what are you looking for? Whatever you're looking for, you're going to find evidence for. So we need to make sure we're steering people in the right direction so that they have the ability to filter those things out. So there are 7 different types of authority. As you will see from the numbers, the majority are one of these 3. So emotional, also called solar plexus, Sacral, also called gut, and splenic. The majority of people, doing some quick maths, there's only about 4% of people that then fall into the other brackets. So 9 times out of 10, you're going to be working with someone that either has an emotional wave, has a sacral gut response, or has a splenic. So to go through on a rough level what they are before we delve a little bit deeper. The emotional authority, which is 50%, about 50% of the population, they can't access truth in the moment. If you say to them, what's your gut response? A lot of them won't necessarily have a gut response. What does your gut say? I don't know. But if you give them 24 hours, 48 hours, they will be able to arrive at clarity. So these are the classic get them to sleep on it, get them to sleep on decisions, get them to just get used to creating time and space between invitation coming in or situation coming in and response that goes out. And usually, the bulk of the work with emotional authorities needs to be around being able to put that in place, being okay with waiting, not feeling like you've got to say yes in the moment, and giving permission to allow them to work that out in their own time. Because 9 times out of 10, they're just waiting for clarity. They're waiting for their emotional wave to come up and they feel mega excited by it. They're waiting for it to come down and they might feel a little bit downcast about the decision. But then they arrive at this moment of clarity where it's just an obvious decision, no matter where they've been with it, whether it's a positive or a negative decision, they arrive at this moment of clarity, and that is what moves them forwards. The sacral response is about 35% of the population. Now, what is mega common is that people will have a combination of the two. Because if someone's a manifesting generator or a generator, they're always going to have a defined sacral, and so therefore they're always going to have access to a gut response, but that isn't always the way that they're designed to make decisions, because sometimes if they've got both, they're actually meant to wait 24 hours, 48 hours to make a decision, but their sacral says yes straight away, their gut says yes straight away, and then 24 hours later they're having to unpick decisions, or they're judging themselves or shaming themselves on a decision that they have said yes to, which should have been a no if they'd have waited 24 hours, 48 hours. So if you're an emotional generator or an emotional manifesting generator, there needs to be that time to wait. You're going to have a sacral response in the moment. Take note of it, listen to it, but just wait to act on your decision rather than acting on it straight away. So with a pure sacral response, these are usually called pure generators or pure manifesting generators. So gut, sacral, pure, different languages that they use. It's that classic gut response, that yes or no response. Gut says yes, gut says no. I go, uh-huh, or mm-mm. It's in the moment, it's very clear, it's very straightforward, and it's a little bit like a flow diagram. It gives you the next step straight away because it's give you that gut response. The other relatively common one is a splenic. So these will always be manifestors or projectors, splenic or splenic. They have a defined spleen, but they don't have a defined sacral or defined emotional center. And the spleen is all about the voice, the inner knowing. Like I don't know where that voice came from. I just knew I had to follow it. I don't know what said I don't need to walk down that path. I just know that that's not a good path for me to walk down right now. I don't know what told me that I needed to turn the steering wheel right, but I knew I needed to turn the steering wheel right, and I avoided a collision. It's that sort of voice that comes into people to steer them. It's a quiet one. So this is why, again, the undefined centers need to be understood so that we can really understand what are the other stories that are getting in the way of this. It speaks only in the moment. If we try and recall what our splenic or splenic intuition was saying, we usually struggle. because it's a bit of a whisper and it's a voice, and it's about training ourselves to trust that voice and to trust that instinct. I often also refer to this on a bit of a side note as a copper's nose. So it's that if you watch any sort of cop shows, drama shows, if they're doing things, they will kind of go, I just had a hunch that I needed to pull that car over, or that it just didn't smell right, didn't sit right, didn't seem right. That's a very splenic intuition that is at play. It's this kind of, what would I describe it as? This primal sense that's all to do with safety. So it tends to shout a little bit louder when it's to do with these senses of safety. So the majority of people you're going to be working with are going to come in with that. The other four are still more than worth a mention. The ego or heart authority is all about desire. So very often when people have an ego heart authority, they have grown up in situations where desire hasn't been taken seriously, or it has perhaps been shamed or judged in some way. And this is all about their desires coming back alive to be able to be a compass point to that person. It can sometimes come in with a slightly materialistic edge for someone with that authority type, but it's not coming from a materialistic place. It's just that they know they need that thing to get them to the next place. So this is why having that awareness, especially if you've got someone with that authority in your space, is important, because to some people it will sound a little bit materialistic, but it's actually something that's trying to guide them, because it's something that's been shamed a lot in them in the past. We then have something called self-projected projectors. These are always going to be projectors, by the way, self-projected. Ego, heart, could be a manifester, can also be a projector depending on how it's hooked up. Self-projected is always going to be a projector. These are people who need to speak out. So they will talk and talk and talk and talk and talk and talk. They are just looking to hear their own voice. They find clarity by talking. So they need to have that space to be able to talk it out. No amount of tune in with my emotions, what's your gut response, what's the inner voice say? No amount of that is going to get them to the place where they need to get to, because they need to hear it in their own voice. And that becomes their compass. Clarity arrives within their own voice. The mental or environmental projector, again, always going to be a projector. So these two are always going to be projectors. Mental or environmental needs to have the right environment. So once their environment is curated around them, they will just be able to make decisions very naturally. And they also need that trusted soundboard, very similar to the self-projected. They need to be able to hear themselves think. They're a mental projector. They need to hear themselves think out loud. So they need that space to be able to do that. And then the lunar authorities are always going to be your reflectors. They have no centers defined within the body graph, and they need to go through the motions. They need to be able to make decisions over a longer period of time. Now, obviously, that is not going to work if it's a short decision or a quick decision that needs to be made. So that's where they need to curate their environment, or have an awareness of their environment and what's influencing them from the outside, but also for longer decisions, be able to work on this 28-day lunar cycle, so that they can let themselves go through these very subtle highs and lows and arrive at that clarity at the end. Most people, as they recognize their inner authorities, when you speak to people outside of human design or within human design, most people know or have a sense as to how they make decisions, but the majority of people are also overriding that by coming up to their head to make the decision. And then we start to get the friction, we start to get the judgment, we start to get the frustration creep in, because the body and the head aren't always singing off the same hymn sheet. So it's mega helpful to have those reflections. So just to delve a little bit deeper into some of the most popular ones, the most common ones. If someone's an emotional authority, as I say, clarity comes through their emotional wave. So the shadow of this, or how this shows up in dysregulation, is that they could make impulsive decisions at the top of the wave. So they get very excited, make an impulsive decision, they've jumped in with both feet, and then they've got to unpack it, which causes them way more frustration than if they'd have just waited in the first place. Decisions when they're in the absolute pits of despair can often be mistaken for how they feel as well, or the truth of how they feel. So again, it's waiting it out. This is my process. I go up, I come down, I land in the middle, and that's my place to make the decision. Dysregulation can also show up in terms of feeling broken for changing their mind. So this often comes in when, as I say, they've overcommitted and then decision is not actually aligned with how they feel. And pressure from others overriding the emotional wave. So you will often find as well emotional authorities can get into that panic buying or that panic jump in with both feet, as I say, and then the pressure just gets to them. So we're really always wanting to work with space with an emotional authority. How can I create space between the thing and the decision so that I can sleep on it, wait on it, be okay with that pressure that I feel inside to give an instant answer, but get used to it and then give a aligned answer at the end. So what does this look like in regulation? Well, it looks like comfort with knowing that they just need more time to figure out an answer rather than living with guilt. Knowing that a decision can just be good enough across many moods rather than being perfect. What's the common denominator in my decision? Okay, that's good enough. Let's move with that because I've had enough. I've had days to work through this. Emotional expression moves through rather than decides. So having that ability to be able to speak from our emotions or to be able to make decisions through our emotions and through our senses rather than relying heavily on the head gives a little bit more fluidity to the decisions as well. And regulated expression can also look like a calm settling that just signals, okay, we're good, I'm ready. And you'll often see when people are working with this, it's just that they land at that space where it's like, okay, I've made peace with this decision now. Good, bad, ugly, doesn't matter. They've made peace with it and they can move forwards with it. So thinking about how can I work with someone with this, asking them if they know about their emotional wave. What does their emotional wave look like? Can they start to track it? Can they start to understand whether they dip to the low first and then go to the high or vice versa? How long does it take them usually to make a clear decision? Is it 24 hours, 48 hours? Do they need a little bit longer? Where are they in the decision wave at the moment? What happens when pressure gets in the way? Is this pressure coming from the outside or from personal experience? Getting them to imagine the choice in those three emotional states as well. So if we're working on a decision, if we're working on making a decision in some way, what's the intense high, what's the intense low, and what's the clear, calm, and collected in the middle? What do those three decisions look like? So you can get people to kind of look at things from different perspectives. And what would I don't know yet feel like? Or how can we start to explain what I don't know yet feels like? Every single person with an emotional authority will know what I don't know looks like, but not everyone is going to trust that that's okay in the moment. So it's really about getting them to pause, take a breath. How can we work with time and space a little bit more? And that is very different to the sacral authority because the sacral is saying you've got an immediate response. It's time to act on the immediate response rather than procrastinating, rather than waiting, rather than letting the head get in the way and talking ourselves out of it. So you can already see complete polar opposite ways of making decisions. The shadow or the dysregulation within a sacral authority is all about answering from the mind before the gut responds. So we revert to our head because that's how we've been taught, and our gut is screaming. Now, a little bit of a side note for people with sacral authorities or defined sacrals, it's very common for me in my practice to see people with sacral authorities also struggling with quite severe physical gut issues. And there's very often a bit of a correlation between the gut trying to scream at them to make a decision and them still making decisions from the head. So there's that kind of physiological response that comes in with this. They can often look like they've said yes to too many things and they're absolutely exhausted. Feeling guilty about a body's honest no. So when the body says no and they in the people pleasing and they want to say yes, or they do say yes, again, it gets depleted and the body just goes, well, what's the point? They're not listening to me. And very often, as I say, a suppressed gut signal, so they can't hear it anymore, can't hear it coming up. So what does a regulated expression look like? How can we start to use the sacral authority if you've got one very easily? A little pause between stimulus and response is okay, but noticing what that yes and that no is and then acting on it relatively quickly tends to be the best way to work with it. It's almost like say yes before you say no and overthink it. It's that classic response. And it tends to come in with these small little decisions on a daily basis rather than these big, overwhelming decisions. And as soon as you can start to build up the evidence for those little yeses, suddenly the big yeses become much easier to make anyway. So it's what does a gut yes look like? What does a gut no look like? How can I start to recognize that on a daily basis and follow it through? Looking at commitments that energize us rather than drain us is another clue. If I don't notice the somatic response, where's my energy being drained versus where is it being energized and fully charged? And it's okay, as I say, to step back and go, let me feel into that before answering, because you might have to go into a different environment, ask yourself a yes or no question, and then act from that yes or no. So sometimes the environment can play about with this and give us kind of false positives, if you like. So it's okay to create that pause, but it's more, what does that gut yes, gut no look like, and how can I start to work with it? So within a therapy setting, it's all about talking about the body. How does my body speak to me? What is the yes? What is the no? How does that feel? How does it show up in my energy levels? How does it show up in my voice? How can I start to work with that expansion and contraction? Gut yes expands, gut no contracts. Getting them to notice those, as I say, little changes in the voice. Is it a or a sound? What is it that speaks to you? How does it speak to you? And what commitments light up the body for them? So it's very much talking about the gut all the time. What's the gut doing? And you can also tie that in again to these conversations on a physiological level as well. How is the gut? What's going on with it on a physical level? So when we then look at the others that are slightly less, that splenic authority, the shadow of this is going to be ignoring quiet knowing. So ignoring that little voice because it isn't logical or there isn't evidence for it or it isn't justified, and then waiting for it to repeat because it likely won't repeat. Once it's said what it needs to say, it just disappears and it dissolves into almost into the ether. You'll often find splenic authorities kind of saying this sort of thing. When I look back, I knew, but I didn't listen, or I heard that, but I didn't listen to it. I didn't follow it through. And it's very often the shadow part of it. So when we're working with it, very often it's about how can we build up little bits of evidence to trust that inner voice, but also create spaces where we can hear the inner voice speak. Because if everything's noisy all the time, You're not going to hear that inner authority have all that much to say. When it's someone that's self-projected, the shadow often with this is them not trusting their voice, or closing down their voice a lot, feeling like they're saying an awful lot, but not a lot at the same time. But that's their clue. That's exactly what they're meant to do. They're meant to talk things out and hear clarity as they speak. What self-projected people also need is a soundboard rather than guidance or advice. I bet my bottom dollar that you will find an awful lot of them in therapy because they just need to talk out without someone giving them advice. And obviously, friends and family, as well-meaning as they often are, don't usually have um, that non-bias filter within them. Self-projected projectors can also have that shadow of waiting for others to tell them what to do rather than trusting their voice, because it's so subtle. We're not talking about body responses with self-projected. We're talking about what they hear on their voice, what they hear as it comes out of their mouth, what clarity they land on. That can often be distrusted or overridden very often in childhood. If you've got a parent that shouts an awful lot louder, you're not going to hear your own self-projected nature come out. So a lot of the encouragement is talk, talk and talk and talk and talk and talk and talk and talk, and don't feel shame and judgment about it. Just make sure you're listening to what comes out. When we have the ego heart authority, this is about that genuine desire. Are they overriding genuine desire to meet other people's expectations? Do they feel guilty about wanting things for themselves? Commitments the will doesn't endorse. Blah, blah, blah. Commitments that the will doesn't endorse. The ego center, by the way, is also called the will center. So again, there's different languages that come in. You will often find that ego authorities overcommit themselves because they want to be doing the noble thing and they want to be doing the correct thing, but it completely overrides their own personal desires. So this is where hooking them back up to their value. What are your personal values? What are your desires? If you think about what a perfect day looks like, what does a perfect day look like? Because they're not looking for things that some of the others are looking for. They're looking for just what feels genuinely valuable to them, and leading from that ego, but in a positive way rather than in a toxic way. So all about the desires when it comes to ego. And then the mental lunar authority, both of them together, they need to have that environment and that time alignment in there. If the environment is incorrect, if the environment is toxic, if the environment is completely pressurized and stressed, they're not going to be able to access their own authority correctly because they need a lot of space, they need a lot of external support for them to be able to take their time to arrive at the clarity that they need. The shadow of the mental projector tends to be that they get in internal loops and they go absolutely nowhere with them. Shadow of the reflector tends to be around deciding quickly under pressure, absorbing other people's opinions, certainty, ideas, and then after a month or so going, how have I ended up this far down the river? This is nothing like what I love or enjoy or want to spend time doing. So it's fascinating how you can then start to pick out how different people make decisions. You'll look at it from your own perspective, you'll look at it from other people's perspectives, family, friends, clients, and suddenly you can start to adapt your language and adapt the things that you speak about so that it lands with them and they actually have things that they can hook ideas and experiments onto as they leave the practice room. So applying it, identify the authority type. What sort of authority are you? What sort of authority are they? How does that work? Is that working for them? Do they recognize it? Where does it come up? How is it trying to speak to them? Understanding their current signal. So have they got a really strong access to their gut response? Or is their gut response physically screaming at them because they've got all of the stomach issues, bowel issues under the sun, but they're not tuning into it on a somatic level? Same with the emotional wave. Do they understand that how that wave works? How does it work for them specifically rather than how they think it should work? Can they name the pattern that they're in? Can we allow them to understand that this is just how they make decisions? There's nothing wrong with them. They probably could, that, emotional authorities, you're not meant to make a instant decision. So don't beat yourself up about not making an instant decision. It's not meant to be your way of making decisions. How can we start to support a little bit of time, a little bit of space so that these things work and people just give themselves a break and work with them? We can then set that RAS experiment with that, because we can say, okay, well, if I've got a gut response, I'm going to look out for all those times when I can use that gut response this week, or I'm going to have a look and really notice what my gut says in this certain situation. We can then start to build evidence, and we can then start to work with it moving forwards as an autonomous decision-making system. And then we can reflect and iterate. So what did they notice? Where did they override their signal? How can we start to build that inner compass gradually so that evidence gets built week on week on week on week, rather than them feeling, as I say, bad about it or beating themselves up about it. So hopefully this has started to give you an understanding how you can use it for clients, but also how you can use it for yourself as well. So for clients, their decision-making system isn't broken. It's likely being conditioned though. So how can we hook them back up to it? Dysregulation blocks the signal, but regulation restores it. So how can we come back to the nervous system work, the patterns that sit underneath it, so that we can allow them to experience their true authority rather than their dysregulated authority? How can we build experiments to create new habits of inner listening with fine-tuned focus rather than it being open? Trust accelerates slowly. So each time I heard it, that is the work. We're looking for what's that evidence that we can build on. And as I say, the authority is body-based. So this is why talk alone can often stall these things, because what we need to tune into the somatics of what is going on a physical level. And then for you, knowing what your own authority is so that you can model it, use it for your own decision-making processes, have an experiment with it and have fun with it. Your chart reveals how you process decisions and experience pressure as well, and that comes in with the undefined centers too. Undefined centers show where you absorb clients' energy. If you've been on the website, you might have seen the free download. I think it's at the bottom of the page. It talks about sponges. That's what the undefined centers is talking about. These sponges where I'm soaking up other people's energy and need to give my sponges a wring out every so often. Recognizing, as I say, where you are a bit of a sponge to be able to wring things out, because we all have undefined centers that we need to work with. And it starts to give you a more personalized practice as well, to be able to work with that. So hopefully that has given you something to work with. The aim of this workshop isn't just to tell you about human design for therapists. That would be a really boring workshop, even though I'm very passionate about it. The idea behind it is that you can take some of this tonight and be a little bit curious and play with it and mold it and see how it fits into your life and your practice and the things that you offer. And obviously it does then tie into the 6-month deep dive that I run. So this is the second time that I'm running it. The first time was an absolute joy, and I don't know how we got through the weeks, because each week goes into a different layer, but it builds and builds and builds and builds. So this is kind of three quarters. Tonight's session is kind of three quarters of what we would do in one session each week. So you can imagine how over time that then starts to build up. Um, we go a deep dive into absolutely everything human design, a little bit of astrology and timelines work as well, and understanding how that all fits in. Also looking at things like human design relationship charts, dyads, and pentas as well, which is the family system to integrate. Um, it's all about, to say, human design for therapists. It kind of says it on the tin. I've gone with a very simple name. Uh, it's online via Zoom every week. We don't start until the 23rd of April, so you've got quite a lot of time, whether you're an emotional wave or you're a lunar reflector or a mental authority, loads of time to decide. Um, and yeah, it's equivalent to 100 hours CPD. And I've also built this interactive learning portal as well to help with this set, because what I found with the previous students is that it was nice to have something to learn, to continue learning with every week. So every week we learn about a new topic, but I love interactive learning, so I built a system within the back end, which is really fun, so that you can go in and challenge yourself and kind of use flashcards and things like that to really get your knowledge going. And it's a space that you can keep going into. So I've split it up into kind of three modules. The first set is all about epigenetics, the neuroscience behind it, science of the self and identity, and then the kind of what I would call basics of human design, which, as you can see from tonight, is not really that basic at all, but they kind of underpin everything else. So energy type strategies, shadow archetypes, not self themes, profile lines, life initiations, transits, planets, authority, cognition, defined and undefined centers, or the sponge works, as I call them. And then as we go through modules 2 and 3, build on those. So we look at the 64 gates, we look at the shadow versus the light gates, or the regulation versus dysregulation expression of them, 36 channels, golden sequences within a gene keys perspective. So these are really helpful for relationships, for business coaching, or for business aspects, also for life purpose, career mapping, relationships. And then the third module goes deeper again, going into the variables, planetary cycles, transits, again, retrograde patterns and mental health, which is one of my favorite things, as well as symptom mapping. So that links into the health style stuff, and then the relationships and family charts as well. So it takes us 6 weeks. I know that 6 months, sorry. I know the when I did this a few months ago, when I did one of these workshops, someone said, "Can you do it in a weekend, or can you do it in a few weeks?" It was, even if we crammed it, it is absolutely impossible, because none of the information is going to go in. We cover vast amounts of information through this course, because it's designed to be everything that you need to then implement it into a practice. So as I say, there's different payment options as well, trying to make it kind of as accessible as possible. There's also, at the moment, I've got an offer on the early bird offer. So there's one-to-one sessions included with me, which you can either use for your own personal development, or you can use them as kind of things as we go through. If there's topics that you need a little bit more guidance on, or things that aren't quite landing, you can also use those one-to-ones for them if you wanted to as well. It says starting the 9th of April, because I haven't updated this slide deck from when I was last planning on using it, when I had to push it back a little bit. We're starting on the 23rd of April, so you've got a little bit of time. So really that brings me to the end of tonight. I am absolutely open for questions if people have questions or reflections or things that they want to share or ask. But hopefully that's given you something to work with and be practical with and use, and also a bit of an indication as to what human design might be able to bring to certain areas of your practice. So I'm going to shut up and save my voice. I'm going to stop recording. And if people want to ask any questions,